All right. So, Franklin, I'm assuming then we will go ahead and begin. Hello and welcome to everyone. My name is Kathy Howery, and I am delighted to be the moderator for today's session. This is a fairly new thing for AAC Canada to have these webinars, and I am thrilled to have this delightful panel, important panel with us today to talk about the topic of a call to action for Canada's AAC community. We have three wonderful presenters, Barbara Collier, Glenda Watson-Hyatt, Colin Phillips. But before I introduce to you all of our wonderful panel of speakers, I'd just like to take a moment to point out and to demonstrate briefly the range of accessibility options, designed so that all attendees can participate on an equal basis during the session. So first of all, to turn on and off captioning, you can go to the live transcript button and click on it and then go show subtitle, and lo and behold, there are the subtitles that you can read if that is important for you. To type a question or comment, which will be read aloud at the end of the presentation. So we're going to address all questions at the end of the presentation. You can click on the question box. So it says Q&A, that's the question box. So to type a question, put it in there. To audibly ask a question, again, if you don't mind waiting till the end of the session, you can raise your hand and I will call on you at that time. And you should please note that the chat, while you can use it, is not going to be monitored for today's session. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers with a little bit more detail. Barbara Collier is Executive Director of Communication Disabilities Access Canada, CDAC. CDAC focuses on human rights, accessibility, and social justice for people who have speech, language, and communication disabilities, and who may use augmentative and alternative communication. In 2019, Barbara was instrumental in having communication recognized as a distinct priority in the Accessible Canada Act. She has a long history working in the AAC field and is a fellow of the International Society for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, recipient of the Onley Award for Leadership in Accessibility, and has been awarded the honors of the Ontario Speech and Language Pathologists and Audiologists Association. Glenda Watson-Hyatt is an author and a keynote speaker. She is motivated by her personal experiences and the continual flow of social injustice faced by others living with communication disabilities. Glenda has worked with CADC on a number of communication access projects, and most recently as a team member and social media consultant on the CDAC communication supports in exercising legal capacity. I also want to say that Glenda is the webmaster for AAC Canada. Dr. Colin Phillips is an occasional policy consultant on the CDAC projects and representative to the federal government's Accessibility Advisory Panel for the Parliamentary Precinct of Ottawa, or in Ottawa, excuse me. He is a contract lecturer in the School of Social Work at Ryerson University and a sessional lecturer in the Social Development Studies at Renison University College. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He holds an MSW from the University of Toronto and a PhD in policy studies from Ryerson University. He is chair of the board of Trinity St. Paul United Church and is also active in the labor movement and in the LGBTQ2S community. An opera lover and a proud Scot, well done. Colin lives in Toronto's Riverdale neighborhood. And with Colin today is his communication assistant, Ted, who will be facilitating Colin's communication with us in the presentation today. So with that, I will say welcome all, and I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Barbara Collier, and it is lovely to be here today. I want to start by acknowledging the land on which I sit as the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, I have to say this again, Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. And this territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. So I'm delighted to be here and to speak to you from Niagara-on-the-Lake in Ontario. Glenda is in BC and Colin is in Toronto. So delighted that we're here. I want to thank AAC Canada and Kathy Howry, particularly for inviting us to present on this topic, and also to Franklin for organizing the actual webinar itself. I'm going to now share my screen. Let's get this going because I have to see my slides. I'm going to turn off, I should have turned off my email. And great, we're on the slide 1 and we've got, I hope that our videos are not going to obstruct too much of the text on this. Tell me if they do, and I think we should just turn off our videos and come on then when we are presenting our different
Looks fine, Barbara. Looks
what
fine.
do you think? Is it okay? Then that's great. Okay, so delighted to be here, and we're going to talk about a call to action for Canada's AAC community. I want to be clear that we are focusing on augmentative communicators in this presentation, but that CDAC, Communication Disabilities Access, incorporates people who have communication disabilities that are not, and they may not be using AAC. And some of those people are on the webinar today. Very quickly, for those of you who don't know us, we're national, we're nonprofit, and we've been doing this for a long time. I can't believe how long it is. It's actually 20 years. So we should have some sort of a celebration. We focus on social justice and accessibility for people who have disabilities that affect communication, but that are not caused specifically by hearing loss. We do not address deafness. We do not address sign language interpreting or captioning because there are other groups that do that. We are a group of people with lived experience as well as professionals. So when we do our projects, we often bring in lawyers, speech pathologists, augmentative communication professionals, as well as people who have lived experience with communication disabilities. And we're entirely project funded. I'm just saying that because sometimes people think that because we have fancy titles, like I'm an executive director, I'm not on salary. We actually do this work right now on a volunteer basis. We have not been funded for any work or any engagement on communication access at federal levels since 2019, since we got communication into the Act. And I'll explain a bit more on that. And the reason I'm saying that is not because we think we're wonderful. It is because we're doing this off the side of our desks, as people say. And we're very limited in what we actually can do. We're doing our best. But just like AAC Canada members do your work in advocating social justice stuff, we're doing it on a volunteer basis as well. And we develop lots of online resources, education, consultation, and we're a watchdog. We read policies going out from different groups, and we say, hey, what about people who have communication disabilities and who may use augmentative communication? So what we're going to talk about over the next, what we're going until 1:15. So and that's Eastern time. What we're hoping to do is get through a lot of the information in 45 minutes, and I should start doing that, and then opening it up for discussion because we want to hear from you. We want to do an overview of accessibility laws in Canada, and we are not going to do all of it, and we are not going to do it in detail. We're just giving you an overview. We're going to talk about a call to action that we have recently done to the federal government, and what we need to do in terms of getting more engagement and more meaningful legislation for people with communication disabilities in the Accessible Canada Act. We're going to hear from Colin about his experiences on the Parliamentary Precinct Committee. We're going to hear from Glenda, who's going to tell us about her experience with the Accessible British Columbia Act. And I was hoping that Sam Savona would join us to do his experiences on the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. He's not able to join us, so I will do that because I've been very involved in that as well. And I want to show you some resources on our website, because if you're like me, you don't have that much time and you put it on, oh, you know, I'll look at that sometime when I have time, and then we never do it. So I want to actually just go through a very quick tour of some of the things that we think would be useful for you to know about, and then discussion. Looking forward to that. What are we talking about? Basically, we are talking about accessibility and human rights laws in Canada. Not all of them, but some of the key ones that we should know about. And these laws inform businesses and organizations what they must do to make their services accessible to people. And the laws that we're going to just very quickly touch on is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Human Rights Acts, provincial accessibility legislation, the federal Accessible Canada Act, and also very quickly, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This is sort of the landscape that CDAC, that Colin, Glenda, and myself are swanning around at this time, sometimes drowning, sometimes being heard. Very quickly, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we all know what that is, and that is the highest level of laws in the country. And what is significant here, there's the ones that I'm just going to pull out at this time, is two challenges for the towards the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. One was Justin Clark's court case, where Justin, who lived in an institution, actually challenged the Charter to say that he was competent to run his own life, to make decisions himself, and to live independently, and to get out of the institution. Now, Justin tragically passed away the last couple of months, but his story and how he presented using bliss symbols in court is such a foundation. It was monumental change in how people it benefited everyone who has a disability, but particularly we need to know about it because we benefit from his experience, because he used bliss symbols at that time. And Shirley McNaughton facilitated, a number of other people facilitated his communication in court. We have his story on our website, and you can see that in the list of resources. Another one that was a challenge to the Charter of Rights was Eldridge versus British Columbia. And basically that was saying that people had a right to effective communication supports in healthcare. And this was around sign language, but we have actually taken that further to say it applies to anybody who needs communication supports. Human Rights Acts, and you'll notice that I'm going through this clippity-clap very quickly. There's two levels of human rights acts. One is the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and then there are provincial human rights commissions. And their job is to prohibit discrimination of people based on a number of different issues, but included in that is people with disabilities. And why that's important to us is that their job is to define the duty to and enforce the duty to accommodate people with disabilities. So what does that mean? That's accessibility, the duty to accommodate. And I want to come back to that as we go through this. Well, basically I can say it now, there's little or nothing that describes what the duty to accommodate means for people with speech and language disabilities and who may use augmentative communication. And there's a lot of confusion about that, and that's where we come in. The duty to accommodate only extends to the point of undue hardship. And that's causing a lot of discussions from organizations that say, oh, you know, we know that the law is to provide sign language interpretation, but we're too poor and we can't provide it. So there's always lots of vagueness around what that duty or that undue hardship means. And of course, for us, we are pushing to have communication intermediaries in the justice system, and we're pushing for the right to have communication assistance, similar to what Ted is providing for Colin during this presentation. We have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and this is the United Nations. And Canada signed or ratified what we call the CRPD in 2010, and then in 2019 signed the optional protocol. By ratifying the CRPD, Canada's basically committed to an obligation to implement it. And we're still waiting to hear that, how it's going to implement that and how that's going to roll out of the provinces versus the federal level. And there's 50 articles in that. Every one of those articles we need to know about because they're all applicable to every one of us. And we just finished a project on one of those articles, Article 12, on capacity and communication. So I know that's another whole topic. I won't be going into it today. The optional protocol, by the way, is a way that people with disabilities can make a complaint to the UN and say, hey, Canada's not doing its duty by us. Then there's provincial accessibility legislation. Well, that's standards. Accessibility standards are sort of guidelines. They're not law. So therefore, the regulations, standards come first usually, and then regulations are laws that emerge out of that, and that's mandatory. And examples of that, the different provinces are doing different things, some more than others, some including communication, many not including communication. And an example would be the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, 2005. Manitoba's Act was 2013. Nova Scotia has one, and British Columbia, and that's very, very recent. And I know that Glenda is going to be talking a little bit about that. But these are, and there's many more, these are just examples of what's going on provincially. And then we have the federal government. And wonderful, we have an Accessible Canada Act in 2019. Now, the Accessible Canada Act only applies to federal services. And I know, and you know, that we really care about provincial services. We care about healthcare. We care about education. A lot of the things that affect us every single day is provincial. However, this is a really important act, the federal government, because it's setting the scene and it's raised the bar, and we're hoping it's going to show the way. And the areas that the Accessible Canada Act covers, the priority areas: employment, built environment, information and communication technologies. That's how information gets to you. I call that information transfer, like websites, getting information out there. Procurement of goods and services, and communication. Now, communication was added as an amendment. It wasn't in there in the bill, but we argued interactive communication must be a priority. And I'll go into where we're at with that right now. So how this rolls out very quickly is that the Government of Canada has to develop standards and regulations for the services that they oversee, like Revenue Canada, Service Canada, Public Safety and Education. Separate is Transport Canada. Don't ask me why. I know why, but I don't want to get into that. And the CRTC, which of course we care about because of telephones. And how it's worked, there's a cast of millions and there's a cast of million and one committees. And there is supposed to be, well, they're hiring right now an accessibility commissioner. And we're hoping that that commissioner will coordinate things and pull it all together and actually give some leadership to this. There's the Accessibility Standards Committee, which is a very important committee. And they establish working committees on different topics. And so far, they've done one on plain language, emergencies, built environment, and employment. It's important to note, there is no representation from our sector, from people with speech and language disabilities on any of these committees or working committee or the Accessibility Standards Committee. Don't get depressed. Or get depressed with us, but we're going to try and move this into something positive here. Now, the common themes, what do people talk about at these? What kind of drafts are being put out and standards being developed? Do I need to tell you? Maybe I do. First of all of them have a directive that they must be developed, not just by policymakers, but they must be made in collaboration with people who have disabilities. And that tends to be people with physical disabilities, mobility disabilities, sensory disabilities, hearing and vision, developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and I could go on. Missing group probably is our group. But most of the accessibility legislation really talks about respectful attitudes, to be nice to people and using good language, and it's all very important stuff. Accessible buildings and spaces like ramps and door openers, hugely important. Information transfer, so accessible websites, alternate formats, plain language, and they have a good sense of providing sign language and captioning services. Who and what is missing? We're missing. And it's not because we're not banging at the doors, we're actually not being engaged. I know, I see you, Glenda. Hang on. And the sort of things that we're not seeing coming out in these drafts, and the sort of things that should be discussed, is accessibility needs. We are not suggesting that Service Canada give us iPads, or that this group develop guidelines for augmentative communication. We have clinics, we have experts, and that's a clinical service. But here's what we do need. We need services that need to know how to give more time to communicate. We need them to know about supports to understand and to support people to express their messages in face-to-face interactions. We need them to know how to provide alternatives and to negotiate accessibility supports over the phone or remote communications like we're doing right now. We need them to understand what we need for reading and completing and signing forms, and that means using alternate signatures. Nobody's talking about that, guys. We need them to know that you need to use your preferred method of communication, and you need access to that method of communication, and that you need to decide to be asked who you trust and authorized to assist with your communication versus just the person that they think should be speaking for you. And we need them to understand that the federal courts and judiciary must know when to bring in qualified arm's length communication intermediaries to assist people in court and to give consent to treatment, and particularly around medical assistance in dying. All of this stuff, guys, is what's missing. And so last week, hot off the press, CDAC wrote an action plan and a call to action, and 11 communication disabilities endorsed that call to action. And these were like mainly Isaac Canada endorsed it, Bliss Symbolics endorsed it, Speech Audiology Canada endorsed it. And so here's the 4 things we're asking for, and you can see the whole document on our website, I'm not going to go there right now, but there's a link. We've given you all the slides, but there's also a link then to the resources that you can go in and get much more information about. But we've asked for 4 things. First of all, I'm sure you noticed that in the latest survey, census, there was no mention of, there was identify your disability, if you have a disability, but there was no mention of communication disability in it. And we're saying, hang on, if you're going to ask people if they have a visual disability or a mobility, you should also find out who's got a communication disability. And then you should collect information about the accessibility barriers and needs. But if we are not included in the census and data collection, then nothing happens, then we don't count. And I know, Glenda, you've been doing wonderful tweets and social media to raise awareness about that. We're saying enough as time has gone by, you need us there. And we have been in touch with them since September, writing letters, everything to change that, and nothing has happened. So in this call to action, it goes to Minister Qualtrough, who's in the Fed, who's the minister in charge of accessibility and other things in the federal government. But it was also copied to the Accessibility Standards Committee, to Transport Canada, to the Canadian Human Rights Commission. We want to see people who use AAC and people with communication disabilities and their representative organization on all committees. Nothing about us without us is the government's mantra. Well, you're doing it without us. We need to be there. There's no excuse anymore that you cannot have us involved in this, and not just send us out the drafts and say, what do you think of this? Because that's how they've been normally doing it up to now. We need to be actually involved in the development. And we need the Canadian Human Rights Commission to actually explain and work with us to describe what the duty to accommodate means for people who have communication disabilities, and specifically for people who use augmentative communication, because that's not been done. And we need clear directives from the federal government to the provinces about what effective communication supports mean in pandemics, like we've just gone through, right? All right, what are we? No, so we're asking them for that. Now, we haven't had a response, and we will be putting it out to all of you. You have to follow us on social media. We will absolutely be sharing any response we get on that call for action. But here, we can't ask people to do things, the governments to do things, and not be there to respond ourselves when they do open up the door for us. So we're saying, we need to all be informed. And on your resource list, I have put, this is relating to the Federal Accessibility Act. I've put their website, links to their social media. The Canada Gazette gives you updates on everything, and there's a contact link to keep involved. So for example, if they put out, here's plain language guidelines, we need to be reading that and telling them, this is great. This doesn't include this. This should have this in here. Have you thought about that? So CDAC, we try as best as we can to put that information out on our social media, because we can't email everyone individually. I would hope that Isaac Canada can also send that stuff out, keep involved and say, this is out there, guys, respond. We also want speech and language associations in Canada to be monitoring this, send it out. It can't just be Barbara, Glenda, and Colin doing this work. And we see a role for AAC clinics, because if you can get this information, send it out to the people who are on your service list. And then we're suggesting we better be there at the table. Now, this is my opinion. You may disagree with it, but I think we need two. I think we do need people with lived experience, but I also think we need to have with that person, it could be their communication assistant, but we also need a perspective that goes beyond one disability. And that is because somebody who has aphasia after a stroke cannot represent somebody who uses augmentative communication from birth, or who has cerebral palsy or autism spectrum or whatever. And I think the training that speech pathologists have is a broader perspective, so that we're not creating barriers for our population based on input from one person. And here's opportunities that we have. We can get involved with public consultations. I know we're a little sick of that because we've told them our barriers over and over. We want to move a little further than that. We want to be on the working committees. We want to be on the Accessible Standards Committee. And we want to be heard, not just give feedback on their drafts, but we actually want them to do something about our feedback. Okay. Now, Colin is going to tell you a little bit. This, again, his experience is on the Parliamentary Precinct Committee. And so this is a federal committee. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Colin, and I know that Ted is going to read your prepared presentation at this point. Have you got your, you need to turn on your, yeah, thank you.
Oh, so yes, as Barbara said, I'm Ted's, Colin's communications facilitator. I'll be reading Colin's words today. Begin. Hello, as Barbara said, I'm Colin Phillips, and I am CDAC's Occasional Policy Consultant. I'm coming to you from territory covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Treaty, and acknowledge my treaty responsibilities to take only what I need, leave some for others, and leave the dish clean. For about the past 2 years, my work with CDAC has revolved around being our representative to the Science and Parliamentary Infrastructure branch of Public Service and Procurement Canada's Accessibility Advisory Panel for the Parliamentary Precinct in Ottawa, roughly from Parliament Hill down to Sparks Street. R-O-U, roughly. Emphasis on roughly. Several national disability advocacy organizations and service providers are represented, and I represent the goals of communication access. Now, to their credit, the government does theoretically have quite an inclusive definition of accessibility. As much as I joke to Barbara about knowing more about HVAC systems than this social worker will ever need, I do think the government is trying. The major challenge has been that, despite this theoretical breadth, there is an almost exclusive focus on physical accessibility. To be frank, I'm around the table with some pretty dominant voices, and it has been difficult to get airtime for our issues. At the same time, an openness on the part of the government has meant being able to make concrete change. For example, one of their reports did not have any any standards when it came out. When it came to when it came to custom customer. When it came to customer, SER, customer service for folks with communications disabilities. We pointed that out to them, bracket, rather forcibly, and they said, okay, work, okay, write us some standards and we will include it. Write us some standards, which we are doing, which we did. Okay, so they said, write us some standards to be included in the report, a revised version of the report, which we did. So they do listen when you make your voice heard. So yeah, the government has, okay, it's been difficult to get airtime for our issues. At the same time, an openness on the part of the government has meant being able to make concrete change, such as the example just provided. The lesson for our community is that advocacy in a context of multiple disabilities coming together requires patience and a willingness to muscle yourself in. Okay, thanks very much.
Well said, Colin. Well said. And I think we've been trying to do that for many years, and muscling yourself in is actually a very good way of putting it. Very good way. But we do have that pillar of communication as a priority in the federal government, and we really need to explain to them that we have a role in defining those meaningful accommodations, because what's really happened is that communication has been misinterpreted, not misinterpreted, has narrowly been interpreted as sign language and captioning, even though, and you can hear my presentation at the Senate, I knew that would be happening, and I asked specifically to please put that in to define who we're talking about here. So I'm going to move on and ask you this time, thank you. We're going to come back to some of the resources that we've been sharing at the various committees. But I have to say, Colin, you're the only one I know who is actually on a committee that is, apart from me giving input to other groups and coalitions, but you're actually the only person I know representing this population on a committee. And that's a small, it's a big committee, but it's not the only committee. There's a whole cast of 1,000 federal agencies that are not linked in with the precinct committee. So, but it's a good start. And can I turn this over now to Glenda, and Glenda is going to talk about an example of a provincial accessibility, not the federal one. She's going to be talking about what's going on in BC and what her experiences are in advocating and being there for change. Take it away, Glenda.
Thank you, Barbara. To provide a very brief physical description of myself, I am a middle-aged white woman with blue eyes and red hair in an asymmetrical style. I am using my iPad to communicate. I would like to acknowledge that I am privileged to live, work, and play on the unceded ancestral territory of the Kwantlen, Katsi, and Semiahmoo peoples. Turning to the accessibility legislation in British Columbia, the Accessible British Columbia Act, also known as Bill 6, received its first reading on April 28, 2020. Supposedly, Bill 6 is aligned with the Accessible Canada Act and other accessibility legislation. However, it is not. Unlike the Accessible Canada Act, which includes communication in the definition of disability, Bill 6 does not include communication. This means, when this legislation becomes law, the approximately 50,000 British Columbians with communication disabilities will be excluded. Under the Accessible Canada Act, or the ACA, the list of accessibility standards to be developed includes communication, other than information and communication technologies. The AC, however, Bill 6 fails to include interactive communication within its list of standards to be developed. This would exclude communication accessibility, which provides conditions for a person to communicate in the way that works best for them, and that can include speech, gestures, sign language, writing, pointing to objects or pictures, spelling words, using a communication device, or a communication assistant. This lack of distinction in Bill 6 will further systemically exclude people with speech, language, and communication disabilities. These two omissions from Bill 6 are extremely concerning to the AAC community. Our voices need to be heard and to be included. And we need our allies to amplify our voices and our stories. Next slide, please. Until Bill 6 passes the third and final reading and becomes law in British Columbia, there are still opportunities to make changes to the Accessible British Columbia Act. All is not lost yet, but we need to act now. What do we need to do to have communication disabilities included in Bill 6? We need to start by being informed. Start by liking Isaac Canada and CDSC on Facebook and following CDSC Canada on Twitter. They will be sharing updates and relevant information on social media. Disability Alliance BC is also a valuable resource as Bill 6 proceeds through to becoming law. Much effort and many actions by the disability community are needed to influence positive changes to the legislation. In recent weeks, I contributed to a review prepared by Disability Alliance BC that was then emailed to all BC members of the Legislative Assembly, or MLAs. I also individually emailed 16 key Liberal MLAs with my two main concerns regarding the proposed legislation. These were two actions which I could take to contribute to the effort to change the Accessible British Columbia Act. Other actions might be asking questions about Bill 6, or sharing your thoughts and concerns, or participating when and where possible. Together, we can make positive change. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenda. I just want to commend you and Colin for the work that you guys are shouldering right now, because you are, particularly you, Glenda, you're all over the map with us, and anything that happens that I don't know about, you'll flag it for me. So I thank you so much. I also want to make sure that we recognize that there are other people who are doing a great deal of work. I believe Anne Abbott is on this call, or on this webinar. and she contributes. Christine Donato does great work. I don't want to say that we're the only ones doing this. Sam Savona does it. There are people doing it. We just need more. And what I think we need is actually a forum where we can all come together and start discussing the good, the bad, the ugly, and also just celebrating our successes too. The Ontario, and I'm just doing this very quickly, is the Ontario with Disabilities Act has been going on for quite a long time, and they have standards for customer services, information and communications. Look at the S there. We always distinguish, guys, you're not talking about us when you do communications with the S. That's media, that's information transfer. I have been trying for years to get them to change this, to call it information transfer, and keep communication as a separate thing, as important as physical space and access to public buildings. Communication is a domain, and it crosses transportation, employment, and everything. But what I think we're missing in Ontario is something that deals with the domain of communication. What is communication access? I've been involved with the customer service standards. You wouldn't know it. And then I've also been involved recently with the healthcare draft standards, and so has Sam Savone. Now we can't write the report, we can't get everything we want, but there's quite a bit there about communication in healthcare, and particularly around what we wanted, we got in there, is communication to provide informed consent around capacity and the need for people to identify who their communication support person is and to have access to their support person and their communication systems. That is out for review, and we have it on our Facebook page, and we really need clinicians and families and allies and speech pathologists and augment to go in there and strengthen it. And on your list of resources, we have given you, there's a link to CDAC suggestion on ways to strengthen it, because sometimes I know we're not sure exactly what we can say. So they're just, and they're not brilliant, but they are our suggestions to help you. There is nobody representing our sector on education. I know that is hard to believe, And regarding the healthcare, they didn't have me involved. I had to write to the minister to beg them to let me sit on that committee, and they finally did. So when we get into the boxing ring, we need our gloves, but we actually need to fight to get into the ring in the first place.
Barbara?
Yes, Kathy, I'm going real quick. And I want to thank you, Kathy. What time is it, Kathy? I have a few more minutes.
You're 45 minutes in.
Okay. Very quickly going to show you some key resources on our website. So you know where they're at, and then I want to take questions and all of the rest. Okay, I'm going into our website. I'm going under reports, guys. There's our call for action. Read it if you're interested. Go into education. Scroll down to making services accessible for people with community. This is a 40-minute, everything you needed to know, but we're afraid to ask, webinar on the things you need to think about if you're going to develop accessible services for people with communication. It doesn't teach you everything, but it tells you some of the key areas to think about. That webinar of 40 minutes is being now used within the curriculum for all public service providers in the federal government. And I think it should actually be on the agenda for provincial services as well. All of the instructors are people with communication disabilities. Many of them use augmentative communication. And here's our guidelines. There's a little booklet you can download about that. And then I'm going to show you one other thing, because I know I want to hear from you. Back into the home page, go into communication access. and then go into contexts. And here, suggestions to make conversations accessible, suggestions for telephone access, reading, forms, note-taking, signatures, websites, conferences, virtual events, healthcare services, financial, employment, justice, there as well. I am now going to just take a moment to go through, because everything we do over the last 20 years has all connected on communication access. So some people want to develop their own things from scratch. We don't have a problem with that. But why do this when so much work has been put in, and we've been funded to do these, and the instructors are all people with communication disabilities. And I believe that we have a framework to start moving around, because sometimes if you're not involved in standard developments, you may not know what types of things to talk about. Specifically around communication access, because people will say to you, oh, it's all about technology. We should have technical devices, and we should tell everyone to learn about the AAC systems. And we go, it's not about that at all, guys. It's about accessible services for people who happen to have AAC devices. I'd love to hear your questions. And over to you, Kathy.
Yes, so we've got a few questions thus far. I also would just like to make a comment that this is off cue, but how valuable those resources have been, and certainly I have used them when in teaching classes and whatnot. So thank you for that, Barbara. Our first question in the Q&A box has been from Damon Kirschbaum. Damon, I'm sorry if I have not said your name correctly. With respect to communication intermediaries, I worry about being saddled with a professional who does not get me. I'm autistic and severely apraxic. An intermediary would need possibly weeks to practice with me so that I could trust them and so that they could understand my difficulties with staying regulated while communicating important information. How do you propose this works without specific understanding of each disabled communicator?
What a good question, Damon. Right on. That has been a concern that we have been grappling with, because we do think that people need to know the person that they're facilitating communication for. I think what we've started to do with intermediaries is to even make the pitch that intermediaries, professionals who can assist somebody, trusted people, should be embedded in accessibility legislation for communicating with police, legal, and justice. Right now, they're not even on the charts for that. They know about sign language, but we've been trying to push that for a long time. So it's for everyone. Now, I agree totally with you, and I think that that's a negotiation issue for individuals. There are definitely situations where justice, for very different reasons, will want an independent arm's length facilitator. And there will be other situations where we're saying, you don't need a communication intermediary because this communication is transparent and authentic. But very often what's happening is that at least they're coming to see an intermediary and to have those conversations. But we don't dictate this must be this, this, and this. We're saying to the professionals in the justice, you need to be having that discussion, and we'll tell you what we think along with the individual needing that support. We'll give you a professional recommendation with the individual. But thank you for your question, Damon. And just to let you know, there's a new update on communication to justice. There's a new entity who will be taking over that. That's another, I won't go into that right now because of time, but the information's on our website.
Next up, thank you indeed. Great question, I agree. Next up is Anne. Anne, you raised your hand. If you'd like to take the mic now and ask your question, that would be wonderful. Is that going to work? maybe while we're sorting that out, I'll ask the next question that was in the Q&A box. And Anne, you're up next, I promise. It's from Gisele, and I'm not going to try to say your last name. I probably didn't say your first name correctly. I'm sorry if I did not. She or he, I think she states, I would like to understand. Wow. I would like to understand why all these different ways of communication are not available right away to all. Why do schools need some diagnoses to start thinking of it? Why do we need to pathologize what is different? It has been so hard for me as a mother of a gorgeous autistic boy who is nonverbal to have the right to have his voice and his way of learning respected. Why has special education has so much difficulty to walk side by side with regular teachers to adapt the reality to all students to learn together?
Thank you, Giselle. We totally support that. We support the access to clinical services, to educational services, to communication supports, to funding for communication devices that people need. That is but however, that whole area should be addressed, I believe, through clinical services very, very strongly. AAC clinics, speech pathology services, and all the rest. And that tends to be provincial. What the accessibility legislation tends to focus on, we can make that broad statement, we support all of that. Accessibility legislation tends to focus on not so much people need wheelchairs as much as when people have wheelchairs, which they should have, then they need to get into your building. So it tends to look at access for people who have the services that should be provided in schools and through communication services and funding, absolutely. But then what we're focusing on here is access to the service themselves. And we're not for 1 minute suggesting that Service Canada provide those services. We're suggesting speech pathologists, augmentative communication clinics provide those types of services. So I'm not disputing it at all. We do need to have very, very strong push for services for everybody and every communication disability group sector.
Thank you, Barbara. What I maybe will say, because I know that I have pointed people to that and we have used your list of ways, suggestions for education that you have on your site to help people understand some of the ways that communication disabilities may negatively impact education. So yeah, so we will make sure that we point some of those things out and maybe point them out in Isaac Canada. It was a great question.
And it's appalling that the two committees dealing with education in Ontario have no representation for communication disabilities, because that's a sort of a given up front. That people need to have the tools that they need and the supports that they need. So thank you for the question.
Absolutely. And can you unmute yourself? I see that you're here now. The mute button is on the bottom left corner of your screen. And perhaps if you're not able to unmute yourself, you could type your question into the Q&A box. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Can you hear us?
Oh,
yeah. Terrific.
Okay,
hello,
great.
Ann Abbott.
Hello.
Hi. Your question was? Comment?
S E W H E when 1 O of M my E employees H A had COVID,
Mhm.
A, F, R, friend,
They-
O, of, M, mine, S, said, no problem, G, go, T, to, A, N, A, T, T, E, attendant, S, E, service,
Mhm.
B, but,
Mhm.
T, H, E, they, W, O, U, would, N, wouldn't,
Mhm.
K, N, no,
Mhm.
H, how, T, to, C, O,
Yeah.
communicate with me,
Yeah.
F, A, S, fast, S, C, A, can, W, we, S, E, C, I, if, W, we, C, A, can, M, A,
Mhm.
make, A, L, all, A, T, T, attendance,
Mhm. Are you saying make attendants be trained in this? Or is that what you're saying, Anne?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay, so let me think. I think COVID, the pandemic, just illustrated so many gaps in support services for people who use AAC. And that's part of our call to action, that we're saying we need to have effective communication standards and regulations in place that for during pandemics, and not just pandemics, all the time. I want to say that we have tried to make our communication assistant training, and you were one of the trainers on that, the 6 courses, 6 lessons, mandatory. We wanted that to be put into colleges and to be used. Now, we had 2,300 people take those courses, and they've gotten really good reviews. And it doesn't teach you everything, but you've got an attendant at least coming in who's got some clue. Because right now you are correct. There is no standard training that focuses on this. So that's exactly why we developed it. And now we say to people who use AAC, you take the reins on this and you insist that the person takes this training and shows you that they have a certificate of attendance. Because unless we get, and I think we can keep pushing the colleges and the direct service managers and all of these people to put this in place, nothing's going to change for it. But you are so right. We have pointed out in our call to call to action that people who use AAC like you're using a word and letter board. Well, where does you can't use that with social distancing. So you're highly vulnerable for that and for losing your staff. So all of this has been put out there, and totally agree with you on that. Sorry, I'm going to leave it at that right now because we could talk forever about it. But thank you for bringing that up, Anne. I just want to say Anne is on the board of directors of CDAC, so she does a great deal of work in this area with me and with other board members.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you now if you wouldn't mind retouching your mute button so that we can hear other people better. Thank you so much. That was a great question. I'm going to now go to the Q&A box. Bill Wallace, I think this is, yeah, another great question. How would the issue of denial of communication intervention services based on age and/or diagnosis fit into or be addressed under the overall goals of this project under discussion?
Hello, Bill. It's been ages. Bill, I think that is not going, that's not within the mandate of the federal accessibility. And I don't know where New Brunswick is in accessibility legislation right now. But to me, you're talking about an awful lot of work that's coming from the service delivery system itself. It's huge. There is this assumption that people just roll out of bed, get into wheelchairs and have everything that they need around them to access their communication and to get on with their life. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. The same thing happened with attendant services, and people needed to get out there and say, look, we can't access Service Canada or a healthcare system or a hospital because we actually don't have any communication services to support us. So I think there's some givens that accessibility legislators need to understand. This is not a perfect level playing field for everybody. People don't have these systems in place, and we need to keep reminding them of that. But at the same time, that's not necessarily their mandate. The pressure should go on the provincial governments to provide those services. I know that's not a satisfactory answer.
Yes, well, we have to, there's many areas upon which we could focus. So I'm going to go back to Damon, you, all of us. I'm going back to Damon, who has another comment in the Q&A. And as a non-speaking autistic guy who learned to type at 14 years old after years of silence, I also worry about gatekeeping by professionals. Specifically, I am noticed this with SLPs. My example is that I learned to communicate on a letterboard before gradually transitioning to independently typing on keyboard or iPad without support of other known person nearby to make sure that I don't become overwhelmed. I worry that some professionals will deny such early efforts at communication, like a letterboard, not realizing the whys of why some people have difficulty controlling pointing with consistency in their early communication journey.
Well said. And it's true. It's true. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen. Absolutely. And listening to you, Damon, and listening to everybody, this is exactly why we need this call to action, because coming out of this, perhaps we need to be saying to each other, let's have more of these discussions, and let's maybe find the topics that we have interests in, and maybe have some smaller working groups evolving out of this on those topics, because we're not going to get to them all here. And I know that there is one is accessibility legislation and human rights, and then the other is the service model itself that you're getting at. And you're talking too about the safeguards, getting information that's unbiased. That's another wonderful topic that needs to be developed. And that's why, yes, maybe we do need to have, CDAC is a disability and professional organization, but there is room for lots more groups and focuses on this. And maybe there is a huge need for a disability focus group to address these issues and share information. But thank you, Damon, thank you.
So I'm going to just let people know that we've got a couple more minutes if there's more questions.
And Damon, sorry for interrupting. There is a whole area where very few people with communication disabilities have actually used the Human Rights Tribunal system. It's extremely arduous. It is very complicated and it is very expensive. And so a lot of people just go, it's too much, I can't even go there. But there are options for taking complaints forward in a very serious manner. We've tried to use those avenues in the past because we think there's discrimination, systemic discrimination for this population, for our population. Forgive me for calling it that, but we think there's systemic thing. And we have not yet been successful with a human rights group that says, we get it and we will help you and we'll go forward with this. Sorry, Kathy, I interrupted you.
No, that's perfectly fine. And I think that was a great follow-up. And a couple of things that come to my mind while we're waiting to see if there's any more questions that come in. You've talked a number of times about having some kind of forum or some kind of meeting, and the virtual world lends itself perhaps to that. So because this is an Isaac Canada, I guess, kind of sponsored event, might you suggest what would you think that Isaac Canada might be able to do about that? That's one big question. How can we as a pan-Canadian organization help? If you have some ideas for us, we'd be welcome to hear them. I'd like to have everyone else hear them. And as the second question that I'm going to ask you is, as this is a call to action for all of us, what would be the one thing, if there's one, maybe two, but if there's one thing that each of us could do as we leave today, what action could you give us to move forward to try and support this work? And Glenda and Colin, please answer as well, or first. Give us all one thing that we can do tomorrow.
No, I'll go first and then you guys. What you can do tomorrow is be informed. Go on to the website, know what's there, know what the messages are, and follow us on social media. Would you agree, Colin and Glenda? Because we often are talking amongst ourselves and our friends retweet and share stuff. And yet our message is for the big world out there. So Glenda has been doing an amazing job around the link between capacity and communication, and how people with communication disabilities are often judged on their capacity. We've been putting out so many messages about this, and we'll have a tweet here, tweet there. But guys, you've all got friends, you've got networks, doctors, lawyers. Put it out, because we need to get larger. And that's one way of doing it. And the next thing I want to say, where do we go from here? I think that it'd be really good for Isaac Canada and a CDAC to have a chat about that, and to have people maybe contact you or me to say, I'm in, I really want to get, now we're doing this on a voluntary basis. Okay, let's just, I don't want to say that, okay, now Barbara, you're doing everything and now you've got 500 people to communicate with. No, let's see who wants to do what, and maybe put out a joint email from both of us to our contacts to say, let us know if you're interested, and what are the topics. We could come up with some things coming out of this that you want to be involved in a smaller group to chat about and to be action driven. What are we going to do about this? That's my suggestion, but I would love to hear how Glenda and
Glenda and Colin, and then there's one more question that's come in. So
wait, now Glenda is saying, become familiar with the accessibility legislation. Absolutely, Glenda, and you're using the read out loud.
Thank you, Glenda.
The signal to share it with everyone.
Nice.
Read out loud. Good.
Okay, thank you. So you sort of underscore the saying. Colin, do you have something to add to our action items? And Barbara, thank you for the call for us to work together, Isaac Canada and CDAC. I think we're already starting to, but let's push it forward. Yeah, nice.
I'm going I'm going to be the CONT. I'm going to be the contrarian.
Okay.
Because why? Yeah. Because you know, any kind of no, because you know, any news, no, any good news, any news, no. That because you know that is just me. Go B E Y. Go beyond social go beyond social media and actually phone or email your MPP, your member of provincial parliament member of parliament. As someone with friends who are with friends who are elected. With friends who are elected. Okay, with friends, someone with friends who are elected. Social. Social media. Really is just noise.
I'm going to interrupt you there, just looking at the time, we're going over time, but Colin, I totally agree with you. And one of the things that we could be doing is sending out the call to action to all MPPs with something that we could prepare, a note that says, this is a huge concern to me personally, blah, 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 that people can customize. I think that's an excellent idea. I think we need both. But let's, I don't want to, I think I'm just concerned about the time. And I think that we could go on all day with these wonderful ideas, and we should set up maybe a follow-up for this. But let's put that down as a really good action that needs to take place.
So just for all of you who aren't in Ontario,
yeah.
You might be MLA in other places.
That's right, member of legislature.
Anyway, and there is one more question from Sherry, who's really asking, how can we better support spellers who use a letterboard? She's acknowledging that she sees the barriers put up, as Damon suggests, happen in education, health, and disability services a lot. I think part of the way we can do that is exactly what you said: build awareness, send people to the site, go to the site, get all of the great information that's there, and start spreading the good word. So
and be at the tables where these discussions are happening, and use the expertise that we already have in the field from lived experience people, speech with augmentative communication. We know what we want. We do, but we need to kind of we need to organize ourselves. We do.
And perhaps this is our first step today. And
Yes.
well, not the first step, Barbara. You've been doing the 20 years. So congratulations. We are over time. I really want to express my greatest thanks to you, Barbara, to you, Glenda, to you, Colin, and Ted, for your terrific presentation, your call to action, and as Stacy says in the Q&A, great ideas, questions, and discussion today. Thank you for all your dedication. Looking forward to becoming more involved. So that's a pretty good statement.
And somebody captured the chat, because I want to make sure that we've got everybody's ideas. Just in case, I know that when we go off, I never see the chats again, but I'm just wondering if there's some way, if there's anything in there that we should be capturing, let's not lose it. Is that okay, Kathy? I'm not sure.
We can try and do that. Probably we needed to do that at the front to say that.
Sorry.
But that's okay.
Okay.
You know, we're living and learning. I will take a quick look and make sure that there's anything there that we need. Maybe
Perfect.
can help as well. All right. Thank you all for attending today. Thank you to the presenters. Let's go out and make some noise. Okay.
Great.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Franklin. Bye
Thank
for
you, everybody. Thank you.
And a special thank you. I know, Kathy, you already thanked our fabulous speakers today, but a special thank you to you for doing such a wonderful job moderating and facilitating today's webinar. And I would be remiss if I let everyone go before mentioning that Isaac is thrilled to be presenting Isaac Connect, our first ever virtual event, August 9th through 12th. So please, everyone, when you are checking out the Isaac website, because we will be posting the materials and the recording of today's webinar on the Isaac website within the next 24 business hours, please also do navigate to the very top where you will see Isaac Connect, and please register, because the window for accessing the early bird registration rates is rapidly closing, and we want everyone to get the benefit of those reduced rates. So without further ado, thank you to our speakers again. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you everyone out there who took part in today's webinar. Thanks very much, and we'll see everyone again real soon.
Bye for now.
Thank you.
Everyone, thanks so much.